So,
Joshua's Max. It's me.
hey, Max.
Hi.
I've actually been sending you a lot of messages on Facebook the last couple of days. Max Eden with the gym tang. So we've
Oh
been
yeah,
chatting.
with the ligaments or whatever hanging down. Yeah, how's he doing?
Correct.
I know he also had the eye
Uh,
infection.
yeah. So I'm on the third treatment of the antibiotic. So the eye's starting to look a little better.
Okay.
He's his right fin is starting to work as well now. So he just, I mean, anything I put in there is he eats. I have to try very hard not to not to overfeed him. So yeah, thanks for everything. He's doing well so far. So
Oh, you're
I think
welcome. Are you just dosing just the erythromycin, or are you doing the erythromycin and the minocycline?
just the erythromycin.
Okay.
But he isn't copper. And then I'm on my second cycle, second treatment of Metro. So we do General Cure, Metro, then General Cure again.
Okay. Yeah, so the erythromycin will work so long as it's a gram-positive infection, but if you notice it's not maybe curing as quickly as it should, then you might have to add minocycline, which is basically just Maricin too,
Okay.
because then that treats gram-negative eye infections. Usually erythromycin gets the job done. Minocycline, you sometimes have to add it, combine it to do gram-negative eye infections.
I think it looks better. I mean, today was, like I said, the third treatment. So, I mean, I think it's looking better already. So it's not totally clear, but
And the
yeah,
ligament hanging, I don't know what to tell you about that. That's something I've never seen before. I actually sent it to a marine biologist that I know, and he was sort of stumped too about it. And he said, well, it's one of those things where it's either it's gonna break off, or the fish is gonna live with it, or it's gonna suddenly take him down. So.
well, he's like I said, that right fin's working now. It wasn't working at all before, or very little. He's I mean, when he swims, it's only 30 inches wide, but I mean, he is very powerful when he swims that little bit. So,
Okay.
knock on wood, I think he's getting better. But those ligaments still are exposed for sure. But everything else seems to work. So just keeping the fingers crossed.
Yeah. Good luck with him.
It probably,
Yeah. Thank you so much.
or if it could be something that happened during collection, or wonder on that, since that's probably collected fish. And
It
that's
looked to me like maybe there was an injury, or I mean, actually, Jessica and I actually talked about this, and we said maybe it looked like an injury that had healed very quickly, because there was no redness, so there was no infection. But then there's actually and I mean, I don't know what it is. It could be spines, it could be ligaments, it could be bones. There's just two, or maybe even more, like white things actually hanging below its stomach. But the fish, like you said, the fish doesn't really seem to be too affected by it. So
yeah, well, it could be even rib bones. The rib bones on those tangs are kind of just long, thin kind of things coming down. When you see the larval yellow tangs, you see that you can see their whole body structure inside, and maybe that's what it is. I know they are raising those. There's a company making gem tangs now. Gem tangs and purple tangs are breeding those now already. So
okay, yeah, I saw
Wow.
that. Yeah.
that'll be.
Yeah, Biota actually is. I
Yeah,
mean, if you go on their website, it's amazing all the different fish that they're
Yeah,
capturing.
that guy, I talked to him at Last Magna for a while. He was pretty nice guy. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting process, and that'll help a lot, because a lot of the stuff, I think, when hobbyists get things, it's from the collection and the shipping, and like you've seen, the collection and shipping, they're all so stressed out. It's crazy. How stressed out they get.
You probably remember that shipment that mine that got stuck in Louisville. It was there for like 2 or 3 days, I think, before it finally moved on to Florida.
Yeah, when you texted me and said, "Could you see if you could go get it?" and I couldn't, they wouldn't even let you. Do you have anybody else pick it up? Would they?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it was just stuck. Yeah,
because I could have taken it over to one of the shops and let them put it in a couple tanks and held it for you for a little while. We could get it.
There was actually a local fish shop there that we even had accounts with the same wholesaler, and they agreed to take it. I just could never talk to anybody at UPS to actually to do the, you know, to release the fish to them.
That's the
Yeah.
problem when it's well, it's that way now. You know, that's the way it is now. I mean, I've got stuff. My wife's picked out these plants I wanted to put in this tank, and just getting the plants from one end of the country to the other. Just one guy, they shipped it on the 17th. Some plants the 17th, and still not here. You know, it's like, and plants can kind of handle a little bit of it, but I can imagine what fish have to go through. You know, and stuff like that. They're not as strong as plants are, you know. So I've had plants that pretty much come in halfway dead, and I can still get them to come back up. So, but yeah, I can imagine that just right now it's a bad time to ship anything, you know, in the way that any of that stuff's going, you know.
Yeah, it's getting, and prices have gone up as well. Even at the wholesale level, the prices now for fish and for shipping are a lot more expensive than they were just a year ago. So that's why everybody's seeing a increase in price everywhere.
Right. It's been a hard time to have that kind of go on, and you know, I've seen local stores saying I can't get these fish anymore. I can't get this particular fish, or I can't get that particular fish, or that kind of stuff going on. And I know it, Matt. You've seen that when you've gone into the stores in town, right? People not saying you wanted a certain fish, right? And you couldn't get it.
I looked for a face forever, and we drove to Indy to get a fox face. Now they're all over, but about probably around March or April, we had to go to that store in Indy to get a fox face.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't nowhere could get him locally, so now every store I go into has them.
Right.
Of course.
I think sometimes
Yeah.
I remember talking to one the distributors in at a Magna, and you know, at the bar or something, and asked him about fishes, and he said there's seasons for fishes, like
Mhm.
you know, like wrasses, certain wrasses, you can only get them certain times of the year. Really, have you ever heard of that, Bobby, or have you ever run into that from anybody you've talked to about?
Yeah, there's actually, if you go on Live Aquaria's website, there actually is a whole section where it's seasonal fish, and they've got the fish listed that you can only get certain times of the year. It's also interesting that there's certain diseases that are certain times of the year, because I've actually spoken with
Wow.
people at Divers Den, and for example, Uranema with chromis seems to be somewhat seasonal, where it seems like, I think they said like in the fall they will see more chromis coming with Uranema than any other time of the year. But yeah, definitely there's different, you know, seasons in it. You know, it's weird. Sometimes you'll just see like a lot of fish available, and then there's limited availability, and it comes back, and sometimes it's really hard to predict too.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I try to tell hobbyists when they put out their list of fish they want to, their stocking list, that some of these fish you're not going to be able to get. And when you just go in the store and say, I want them, can you order them? Because they're just not there. They're not in the channel, you know, that they
Right.
just, I think it more has to do with the spawning time, and then the time it takes to go from gestation up to growth until they get the size that are what I would call marine aquarium size fish. You know, they're certain this size where, you know, in reality they'll be this big if they were out in the ocean.
Right.
What we would use them at would be that small ones. We don't want the really gigantic ones, you know. And I think that's what divers are waiting for, that certain time of the year when they know that those fish are going to be come out of their when they change from a larval fish up to a actual fish, and until they get to a size that is collectible, they know generally what time of the year that's going to be at, and they just go out there and get them then, you know. And
It also comes down to
know that, you know, they don't know that.
certain wholesalers seem to have a certain like lock on certain fish, like for example, like Australian specimens. There's particular wholesalers that I think basically they actually, all the collection stations, they own the collection stations, and the people work directly for them.
Mhm.
So if your local fish store doesn't have a wholesale account with Quality Marine is the one that just comes to mind, then there's certain fish, if they don't order from Quality Marine for whatever reason, there's certain fish your local fish store is never going to get, because Quality Marine, for example, just has a lock on those fish. I mean, mostly fish from Australia. It's just what comes to mind to me. But and then sometimes like certain collectors will have agreements with certain wholesalers that they will primarily sell to them because the wholesaler buys in quantity, makes it worth their while. It's just easier to ship to them and everything. So that kind of factors into it too.
Yeah, I would. I haven't talked to Cairns Marine about that, but they're always at the Macnas and because they're always looking for business. And I was wondering what their situation is, since that's what they do is Australian fish, pretty much. Is there any disease that what is a fall disease that you found that you see more in the fall time? You were talking about stuff you see more in the fall as far as diseases coming up. Is it
Well,
velvet?
urinema would be primarily, and that was with my conversation with Divers Den about how they see urinema more in the fall. Other than that, I can't really think of a disease that, I mean, when I was, selling quarantine fish, that I would see more certain times of the year. I mean, it would kind of make sense to me that maybe you might see ick and velvet and, parasitic diseases more in the summer because the warmer, water temperature kind of accelerates their life cycle. Of course, our summer isn't necessarily their summer, so it would be summer at the collection point. But it was really hit or miss. I would get some shipments in and they would go great and little difficulty quarantining them. And then you get a shipment in, it's just a nightmare,
Right.
bacterial infections and ick and velvet and everything else going on. It was really kind of hard to predict what kind of shipment you would get. It could even be from the same wholesaler. It could be back-to-back shipments, and one wholesale shipment could be good and the next could be bad.
I talked to the director of down at the Orlando Mac. I talked for a long time to the director of the Living Seas over there at the Epcot Center,
Mm-hmm.
and because what he does, he had his crew build a shipment container that had a complete. He had a complete circulation system and filter system. It had a chiller and a heater system in it, and all his fish, he would get them from Cairns Marine, and any fish that he got, he shipped the container down to Cairns. Cairns put their fish in that container, and then they shipped them from Cairns Marine up to Epcot.
Oh,
And
wow.
and that's how they got to where, because he was having the same problem, but he's dealing with, say, bigger fish, and because of in a size big aquarium, they're going to have the gigantic parrots and stuff, and so he was worried about just getting those big specimens up to his, and of course he didn't have to worry about a budget.
Right,
you know
exactly. Yeah.
and it would be nice just if you could have like a temperature sensor or something just inside the box. We could just stick it in there. You could see what the temperature was, or recorded temperature over a course of the time it came from LA, say, to your house in Florida.
They actually have such a thing. I forget the name of it, but you can actually, it's a little sensor, because I was doing this with my shipments. You could put in the shipment, and then you can tell like every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, to take a temperature reading. And then once it gets to its destination, then you could just stick it, like it had like a USB drive. You could just stick it in, and it would give you all that information to tell you the temperature swings, throughout transit.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I'd have it's something that he did. He was just I was just fascinated. He had this big long story about how they had to do that for all their bigger fishes, and because they were losing so many fishes just trying to come up the regular way,
Right.
deliver them the regular way. And then they would just use these big containers, that would have all this stuff built. He had his phone, he pulled out, and there's a picture of it. He showed a picture. That was with all the guys around the bar, how it goes. And I'm gonna get another guy on here.
Yeah, one time I tried to do a transshipment from Australia for me to quarantine the fish, and the shipping charges were going to be something like $5,000-$6,000, and I quickly I said, that's not for me. I'll just stick with the wholesalers.
Right. Yeah, it could be a lot. You almost have to have 2 or 3 stores or something to get into that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, pretty much how you have to get a number of people together, like get every store in the area together to justify those kind of shipping charges.
Uh-huh. Hey, Bobby. And Bobby Moser coming on here, one of the club members. He's on there. Hey, he's back and forth connecting audio. It says, "You there, Bobby?" He's there. He's waving. Yeah, it's to me, it's the hardest part is just getting a fish that's livable and that kind of stuff. What any foods that you would recommend people use, or
I
uh,
love LRS. I mean,
LRS?
I love LRS foods. He puts probiotics
Mm-hmm.
in the food, especially I think it's called the Breeders Blend.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually like a lot smaller particles of food. So I mean, all the fish eat it, even like the smallmouth fish, like certain wrasses and whatnot. I also like for small fish, especially for small anthias and wrasses, calanus, which sometimes comes in like a 2-pack. Like you'll have the PE mysis on one side and the calanus on the other. And it's just basically frozen pods, is what
Right.
it is. But that's really good for those finicky anthias, or like some of those like those wrasses that can be like the fairies and the flasher wrasses can be finicky. Sometimes they'll eat that. And I'm a big believer in live blackworms, which I know are kind of hard to get sometimes, but I love live blackworms to feed the fish.
Right. It's hard to find those sometimes. I would culture stuff like that. You know, if you could practice
Mm-hmm.
culturing, things. I used to culture, always kept vinegar worms. For
Mm-hmm.
small fish. Because I have fish that are full grown right now. I have fish that are maybe a half inch. That's a full
Okay.
grown fish. So I'd kept vinegar worms for them just to stick in there and let them have some live foods. Live foods is a good thing for fish to have, every so often to get that kind of stuff going on. But
So Paul is who kind of got me on the live blackworms kick, because that's what he
right,
often feed. And now wherever he lives now, he can't get live blackworms as easily. So he's actually started culturing live white worms, which you can actually, they're actually, land based. You can just do them like in soil. And
right,
he says the fish eat those just as well, if not better, than live blackworms.
yeah. Well, it's easy to get if you go to if you go on like the freshwater. I can't remember what it's. There's a freshwater site that you get a lot of different things from, like fish from fish breeders.
Mm-hmm.
And there's several guys in there that's all they do is sell that stuff. You know what I mean? That's all
Right.
they do. And they'll sell you a starter kit of it. I just got a starter kit of the vinegar eels, and that's such an easy thing to keep going. I mean, they're like nothing to keep going. It's real easy to keep going, and you just keep changing. Make sure your culture. I'd fix up some oatmeal, and you take after 2 weeks, I'd take all of the scrape off the top, put it in another container, and throw that container away, and then it starts all over again. And you just take a little paintbrush and go around the outside, and then just kind of wiggle it in some water, and then the worms will separate out of the muck of the
Yep.
oatmeal, and then you just suck them up and in the tank. It's
Right.
really easy process. But that's for breeding. That learning about breeding fish kind of thing. But it does help for real finicky fish, that are real particular. I know, Matt, didn't you have some mandarins that you were trying to get eating things? I remember talking about that.
Yeah, they officially eat pellets now.
Do they?
Right.
That's
Yep.
good. That's a rarity.
Yep, got them eating pellets with a little live brine mixed in there, but they actually like the pellets now more. But the biggest issue with that is nothing messed with the pellets before. When we first started getting them to eat it. Now the fox faces realized he likes the pellets, and so have to get them on the rock. If they go on the rock, he kind of leaves them alone. But if they're floating around, I need to build one of the little mandarin feeders. That'll be nice. But yep, they're eating pellets.
Yeah, that
Both of them.
mandarin feeder that he has is really nice little design. For that just keeps the things from floating around. Because all the other fish will go on and start eating. It's like dogs. I have 2 dogs, and one of them will finish all their food, then they'll try to finish the other dog's food.
Yeah, there's actually a company that builds, it's called a dragnet's den. And it's just basically like, I mean, it's like a rectangular, they probably made it out of like plexiglass or whatever, like a rectangular box, and there's a little hole in it.
Yeah.
And then I think what they did is basically took a test tube, they drilled it and put it in there. So basically the Mandarin can go inside of there and you can shoot food through the test tube into the little chamber and he can eat it up, and none, unless you have like some small wrasses and stuff, the larger fish anyway can't get in there.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question while we're on food?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go on.
So I've been reading through your forum, and we talked a little bit, you know, about supplements and the beta glucan and several, I don't know how to say that, several other things. What do you quarantine or just display tank wise? What is like you said you use LFS. What all do you mix in with your food for, you know, just a normal display tank or a quarantine tank? Supplement.
So like, okay, so for like my display tank, I would basically just take the like LRS, or you could take Mysis or Brian, and I like Cellcon. I mean, there's a lot of different products. I mean, there's Cellcon, there's Zocone, there's Vitachem, and I just basically put like a few drops in it and mix it up. And I mean, most of it you're gonna lose to the water anyway, but some of it does actually get on the food. You can actually put like some drops of salt water, mix it up, maybe let it sit about half an hour, and then feed them. So that's kind of what I would do for the DT. Now, for a QT situation, if I'm going to prophylactically treat for like, you know, like intestinal worms and parasites, I would soak API General Cure, which has Prazi and Metro in it, and then I would also use CChem Focus to bind the medication to the food. And then I actually will put like a little sprinkle of Epsom salt, because it's a laxative, and what it does is it basically flushes the parasites out of the intestines. So that's, and I actually have on my forum and on my website, there's like a little recipe that I have with there, you know, the little things that I do, but that's what I generally do in quarantine. The only thing is meeting, hang on a second, I just got something here. Oh, okay. So basically that's what I do. Now the thing with General Cure, it's pretty all inclusive, but I think it's nematoids. It's a type of intestinal worms that Prazi does not treat. And if you were to encounter those, which the only way you would know is if you keep seeing white stringy poop, even though you've been feeding General Cure for a week or two, you then have to switch over to food soaking fenbendazole, which is another dewormer. So, I mean, if you really want to get down to it, what would be the most inclusive would be to food soak fenbendazole one day and Metro the other. Might be a little bit overkill. General Cure usually gets the job done 90-something% of the time, but every now and then you do have to use fenbendazole if you're encountering Prazi-resistant worms.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not feeding that when you're actually dosing General Cure to the tank, right? You're feeding food without. Go ahead.
I would probably skip. So what I would do, so you don't possibly overload the fish with too much medication, what I would do is you can food soak General Cure, but on days when you're dosing General Cure, I would probably not food soak just on those days, so that, you know, the fish aren't getting too much of the medication through their system. Because, you know, fish drink a lot of water, and the medication that's dissolved in the water also, you know, passes through their GI tract. So I would probably not food soak medications on, you know, on days when you're dosing medications.
See, Bobby Moser said somebody mentioned him. He's busy on the road. He can't ask a question, but you want to know what's the best way to QT a new fish? That's just a basic QT methods we've talked about many a time, but you want to talk about that for a minute, about just the basic, when you get in. Of course, I always say, at least get you a tank set up first. That's the first thing. Get you some kind of tank set up. It's the hard part.
So basically, yeah, like you're saying, the very first thing you want to do is you want to set up a quarantine tank, and a lot of people try to run a quarantine tank without a biofilter. I mean, you can do it that way, but then you're constantly struggling with ammonia, and, you know, stuff in life comes up. You can't really do the water change, and then, you know, you get an ammonia spike, and, you know, all hell breaks loose.
Right.
So the best thing I find to do is set up a tank. I use CChem Tidal HOB filters. I mean, you can use Aqua Clear, has an HOB. The Bio Wheel is another good one to use. And What I do personally, just to save money on buying nitrifying bacteria, like both the AquaClear comes with a pretty thick sponge, the Seachem Title comes with a sponge, and I think it's called Seachem Matrix. And I actually put those in my DT sump for about a month or two. And what happens is enough nitrifying bacteria that's in the water transfers onto the media. So then when you do need to quarantine, you can then put that back in your quarantine tank and it becomes a biofilter. It's going to process out ammonia for you. So once you have your quarantine tank set up, what I do is when the fish arrive, I drop them. I use Copper Power. I mean, that's just the brand of copper that I use. And I drop them in 1.0 ppm Copper Power. And I have found that really the fish seem to tolerate going right into 1.0 Copper Power with no ill effects. And then it's best to take a week to slowly ramp up the copper level to full therapeutic. So full therapeutic is 2.0 to 2.5 ppm for Copper Power. So you want to take a full week to slowly in small increments to raise the copper level up. I actually find, this is kind of being a little whatever, but I actually find if you can do it multiple times per day, very, very small increments, multiple times per day to slowly get the fish used to being in copper poison, because that's what it is. And they adjust to it better. They don't stop eating. They don't seem to suffer side effects. And then I put them in that. So once they're in therapeutic copper, I start a 14-day countdown. And I'll explain that in a minute. Now, also while they're in therapeutic copper, you have a 14-day countdown. And what I personally do is then transfer them from a medicated tank into a different aquarium that's 10 feet away, that what I call my observation tank. If you can't, I know for some people that's too much to deal with, 2 tanks. If you only have 1 quarantine tank to use, then you want to leave them in therapeutic copper for 30 days. Either way, once they're out of therapeutic copper, whether you do the 30 days or 2 weeks, once they're in observation, which you're in observation for 2 to 4 weeks, you want to dose General Cure, which is a dewormer, and you want to dose it once. You want to wait about 6 to 7 days, do a 25% water change, and dose it again. And what that takes care of flukes, black ick, and other worms. And that, I mean, nothing works 100% of the time, but that's going to take care of about 95% of diseases and problems that come our way.
Now I know you said about the sponges and the hang-on filters, but I know Mike, he's the one that wanted me to ask this question. Would you suggest that same routine for, say, flasher or fairy wrasses, being that they're really suspect with copper?
So my success with wrasses is really hit or miss. I'm not going to lie. I have much better success with this protocol running angels and tangs, but when it comes to wrasses and anthias especially, they just don't seem to tolerate the meds as well. So there's always alternatives. There's always more other ways to quarantine. And one thing you can do, and this is something that we've actually working on my forum, is called hybrid tank transfer method. So what hybrid tank transfer method is if you're familiar with tank transfer method, it's moving the fish to a different quarantine tank every 72 hours for 13 days. What hybrid tank transfer method does is you're actually dosing hydrogen peroxide. You're giving the fish 150 ppm hydrogen peroxide bath 6 days apart. The tank transfers prophylactically treat ick. The hydrogen peroxide, we believe, will prophylactically treat velvet, broken urinema, and we even believe flukes. So it's an alternative. It's probably, you can go on my forum and there's people where we have a thread where we're testing compatibility. You can see all the different wrasses that have been run through this treatment. Most of them are tolerating it very well. So that's one option to do. Another option is when you get the fish, you can actually give the fish 150 ppm hydrogen peroxide bath for 30 minutes. You can put it in just an observation tank, no medications. And what you can do is convert some freshwater black mollies to salt water. And basically these are your canary fish, because freshwater black mollies have no immunity to saltwater pathogens. So what you're doing is you're actually quarantining the wrasses alongside the mollies in a medication-free environment, and you're waiting to see if these mollies hit with diseases. If they do, then you know that the wrasses must have, let's just say it's white dots, you know, then the wrasses must have ick or velvet as well. So you have to treat them. If the mollies are all clear after 30 days, it's safe to put the wrasses in your DT without applying any medications. So that's kind of like, to me, like little ways around, like ways of quarantining these med sensitive fish without maybe having to expose them to copper and other harmful chemicals.
All right, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're not really gonna get the fish all going crazy, you know, for over treatment.
Right.
Well, Ed, I have a little soft spot in my heart for wrasses and
Right.
the more expensive side of wrasses.
You're always in one, Bobby. You're always on for the expensive stuff, you know.
Well, you get what you pay for, Ed.
I know.
But I was thinking about setting up some kind of quarantine system here too, because I mean, I've got so much money in this fish tank that I don't want to have to tear everything down to accommodate a fish.
Right.
Right.
The
And the funny thing
one of
about,
the main things would be, I would think, also when you do, if you get a chance to do that, always make sure that your QT tank or whatever is away from your normal system, and you don't share any of the the all utensils or buckets or nothing from the QT tank to the display tank. That's one of the because that a lot of that stuff is airborne, and it'll just jump from one. Bobby could tell you, they'll just jump from one tank to another, and
right.
you know about it. You didn't even know what happened, and all of a sudden you get your whole display tank with any fish you got in there with ick, that kind of.
So Ed, you're saying I need another fish room?
No, I would just say put it away from it, separated enough so you don't have, like a fish net or a bucket that you use to change the water, the hoses, it's just a way of separating it. Like a quarantining that equipment into one thing for the time you're quarantining the fish. Then you can just clean it all well and put it over in a corner and say, well, I'm not going to use that stuff, and only when I'm going to bring a new fish in the system. It's just a way of making sure that the disease doesn't jump from the quarantine tank to your normal fish that are already in your aquarium and not having any problem. That's one of the things that I know Bobby taught me about that, and it's a lot of people don't think about it, and that's how it happens in stores a lot. It happens in stores all the time that they get it from one tank to the next because everything there is all in one big area. They don't even.
I tell people 10 feet. I mean, there was actually a study done, and to preface this, they used high-powered fans to do this. I mean, it was not done in like a home environment, but they actually were able to transfer velvet dinospores, which are the free swimmers, from one pond to another 10 feet using the high-powered fans. I think for static environments where there was no airflow whatsoever was 18 inches. So I guess we fall somewhere in between. I mean, we all have ceiling fans going and air conditioning and stuff like that, which provides airflow. So, I mean, it's somewhere in between 18 inches and 10 feet. I just tell people 10 feet, I mean, to be completely safe. And I mean, another thing too, if your QT is in the same room as your DT, just out of habit, sometimes you just put your hand in the QT and then you're overworking the DT without even thinking about it. If you have to go through a door, you might think, oh, wait a minute, I was just working in QT. Let me go wash my hands really good before I put my hands in the display tank.
So it sounds like I need to build a wall in my sump room.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. You don't want it too close to your sump either, so.
He's going to make me show him my room there. I knew
Yeah,
that.
let's see your room.
Oh yeah, Bobby likes to show off his room now. He likes to show his room.
Now that I have a room again.
Yeah, he's got can you see how you can see his, jump it up, you can see it? See if I can get it.
So I was actually thinking about putting a QT system over here. But as you can tell, that room is not that big.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
So I'd say it's probably 8 feet from my sump.
Yeah. I mean, you might be okay, but I mean, personally, I mean, I'm super paranoid about this kind of stuff, so I probably would put it in a completely different room.
Mhm.
When I was quarantining fish, I had a fish, well, I had a quarantine room, and the retail room where the fish went into was completely across the hall in a completely different room. And it helped me a lot because, like I said, I would sometimes be working in the quarantine room, and maybe I would hear something going on in the retail room that didn't sound right, and I would kind of find myself heading over there. And I'm like, wait a minute, it gave me enough time to kind of think about it, and I would yell at my wife or something and say, hey, can you go see what's going on in the retail room? There's a fish flopping around. Maybe I left the lid off or something.
Yeah, I do stupid things like that sometimes. You forget to do things, all the time. It's easy to make a mistake. That's what I always say.
Human nature.
That's right. It's right. It's right. Easy to make a mistake. So I'm always trying not to make a mistake if I can, but unfortunately we do. But yeah, we had Bobby. Also, I think sometimes you have certain fish have a really thin slime coat compared to other fish, and so that also plays into effect as far as medications on for diseases on the skin and what they get and what they don't get and that kind of thing. Don't you think? And that's another area to think about. It's like the blue tangs have a really thin slime coat compared to like powder blue tangs. All those have a thin slime coat compared to, say, maybe a triggerfish. You don't get many triggerfishes have many diseases, and I think that can be also from just the type of fish that what they do in their natural environment. Just like a buzzard doesn't hardly catch anything because it's always eating dead stuff all the time. So
Right.
thanks.
Yeah, wrasses and mandarin. Well, there's a lot of fish really. Wrasses have a really thick slime coat. Mandarins have a thick slime coat. Triggers have a thick slime coat. And those fish are just going to be naturally more resistant to all pathogens, parasites and worms, because they have that protective barrier where tangs, especially powder blue Achilles tangs, angels can be kind of hit or miss. I'm trying to think of some other fish that have a fish that's like a puffer, for example, has a very, thin slime coat. So they're more susceptible to pathogens just because they have less natural defenses, because basically the way the fish's immune system works is when it detects a pathogen, it releases, I forget what it's called exactly, into the mucus coat, like a serum into the mucus coat to fight off the pathogens. Probably the best at this is a rabbit fish. They actually did a study where rabbit fish actually can release a serum into their mucus coat, which actually fights off ichthyophons. It's the only fish so far they found that do. But it's the only one that they've discovered so far. But probably more fish have this capability. So yeah, that really comes into play. But the problem kind of comes into it's like, so let's just, like, I knew a guy one time. He had 150 gallon. No, he had like 30 or 40 wrasses. He had no other fish in the tank but wrasses. Well, he never quarantined because there were wrasses, so they were naturally resistant. But every time he would try to put a powder blue or an Achilles tang or something in his tank, it would break out, nick, and it would die. So even though the wrasses were naturally resistant, they kind of served as sort of like a reservoir for the parasites. And then basically a more susceptible fish would be put in the system, would have an outbreak, and would die.
Yeah. That's the problem with that I've found with some fishes that you say they have. People just don't understand that the differences in fishes and the different types of slime coats and how that affects even medications and all that kind of good stuff on fishes. It's a complex topic to talk about when you talk about that, and what some medications won't even affect the slime coat at all. And you had to go into a whole different direction, I would think, to get it to work.
Right.
Well,
I don't know if we have time. I actually prepared like a little slideshow. I was going to kind of
Sure.
show everyone.
Yeah, you can show. Put it on.
Yeah.
We got about 14
Let me
minutes.
see if I can get this up here. Okay, so what I have to do, I have to share my screen to make
Right.
this work.
Right.
Okay. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
That's me. I don't know why I
Okay.
do it. Now let me see if I
Like
can.
a little, because I have like, I took some pictures and stuff, Dick, Velvet, you know, to kind of show everybody the differences.
Well, let me see if I can find it. If I can figure out what this good. I haven't done the
Okay.
screen sharing part. I've
Because, you
been.
know, I know a lot of people, my wife's saying you have to make me a presenter to do it.
Do I? Multiple. I did that. I said multiple persons can share simultaneously. I can do that.
Oh, okay, that works, okay. So wait,
Does it
so let
work?
me share my desktop.
I know your wife knows more about that stuff than any of us do. So,
There
Let
it
me see
is.
if I can- let's see if I can get this to work.
yeah.
So you should be seeing a big screen that says identifying
Right.
fish diseases.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So I just did this, we can kind of go through this kind of quickly, but I just kind of did because, you know, I know a lot of people, you know, white spots, well, I mean, that could mean a lot of different things. A lot of people just assume every white dot they see is tick. So I just wanted to do like a little presentation for you all to show you the differences in some of the different diseases. So this first one here, if you can see it, you can see this hippo tang with ick?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So this is a hippo tang with ick, and you can tell it's ick because the dots are oval shaped, and we'll kind of get back to this in a minute, and they're oval shaped and they're a little bit larger. Now here's a hippo tang with velvet. You see how the white dots are a lot smaller? So that's really the best way to tell the difference between ick and velvet. Ick is going to be larger white dots. They're going to be oval shaped. Fish with velvet is going to have smaller white dots. And here's another great way. You notice how on this, and here's another picture here. So you notice
Hey,
how
what,
on this
mute their
hippo
speaker.
tang- oh,
Will everyone mute their speaker? We're getting a lot. I'm getting a lot of feedback, except for Bobby. Yeah, we mute your speaker, Ed, Chris.
okay. So this hippo tang here, you can see it has velvet because you can see the tiny white dots. Also, another thing, you notice how the eye is cloudy? Well, that's another symptom of velvet. A lot of times, velvet actually will cause the fish to have cloudy eyes. And if you notice here, if you look at those white dots on this hippo tang, you really can't count them. I mean, it's just so numerous that it would be really difficult to count the number of white dots. So that's, again, that's how you can tell it's velvet. Now let's go back to the one with ick. You notice how you can count that? If you actually sat there, you could actually count the number of white dots on that fish. That is one way to tell it's ick. So if the white dots, if they're too numerous to count, odds are you're dealing with velvet. If you can count the white dots on the fish, odds are you're dealing with ick. Ick is a much more manageable parasite in a DTT than velvet. A lot of people manage it with nutrition. They manage it with a UV sterilizer. Velvet, on the other hand, is it's very difficult to manage because of the pure number of parasites attacking the fish. You also have to keep in mind all those little white dots you see, what that is that's excess mucus around where the trophonts burrow in. Those are also inside the fish's gills. So every time the parasites get inside the fish's gills, excess mucus forms, and the fish, it's more difficult for them to breathe. So a lot of times fish with velvet will die from asphyxiation. They'll basically suffocate to death because they just can't breathe. Fish with velvet also will swim into the flow of a powerhead, like any kind of flow, because they're seeking relief. They also, velvet makes them sensitive to light, so they'll act reclusive, they'll stay out of the light. So again, we'll just go back, there's ick, and on the same species of fish, there's velvet. You can kind of see the difference between them. Okay, so the next one we'll move on to is brook. And this is, a lot of people call this clownfish disease because it's mainly clownfish that get this. And you can kind of see right there by the dorsal fin, it's sort of patchy, like it's not clearly defined dots. It's more like it kind of looks like the skin is peeling a little bit, or it's, that's how you tell brook on a fish. Now this is just the initial stage. This is a clownfish with brook. It's in a more advanced stage. You can actually see like the white mucus all over the fish. It's kind of patchy. That's the word I'm looking for. If you see a fish with patchy white on it, you're dealing with brook. And this is another symptom right here. You can see here that the mucus is actually starting to peel off the fish. That's another symptom of Brook. I don't know of any other disease other than Brook that causes a fish to do this, where the mucus actually peels off the skin. Now, it's interesting because just yesterday, somebody was on my forum and they posted a picture of a yellow tang. Well, look, that yellow tang has Brook. You can see again how it's got like that patchy whiteness on it. So this is kind of a good example of, you know, everyone says, well, Brook is only, I only have to worry about it for clownfish. Well, no, not necessarily, because this yellow tang, there's another photo here. You can see how it clearly has Brook on it. So the treatment for Brook, so kind of getting ahead of myself, most people treat ick in velvet with copper. That's just sort of the standard treatment. The treatment for Brook is formalin or Metro. Those are the two, and we're going to kind of get into the medications a little bit later, but that's the treatment for Brook and uronema would be formalin and Metro. So speaking of uronema, so this is, it most often will afflict chromis damsels. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, like in the fall. You can see the red sores, and also another little classic symptom of uronema, see how the mouth is open. This is a disease, excuse me. This is a disease you do not want to get in your DT because there is no, there's no fallow period for it. Once it's in your DT, you have to assume it's there indefinitely. So I tell people, if you're going to quarantine chromis damsels, best thing to do is just give them a formalin bath upon arrival, put them in a quarantine tank, and dose C-Chem Metroplex for every 48 hours for 10 to 14 days. Okay, so that covers the parasites. So we'll move on to flukes. And this is a treatment that, to treat this, you know, you use API General Cure, or you can use PraziPro. It's very difficult to see these on fish. Now, the fish up above, there's a black clownfish. You can kind of see the white, the flukes on them, and that was a royal grama. You can kind of zoomed in and you can see the flukes on it. But on a light colored fish, like a yellow tang or something, you may not even see flukes because they're opaque. Below is, if you give a fish with flukes a 5-minute freshwater dip, the flukes will fall off, and at the bottom of the freshwater dip container, it will look like white sesame seeds. So that's how you know a fish has flukes. It's a good diagnostic tool for flukes. Okay, speaking of worms, black ick. So it's called ick, but it's actually a worm. And it's a flatworm infestation, and what happens is it looks like little black dots, and it's, again, tangs seem to be most susceptible to it. Little black dots on the fish. It's actually one of the easiest diseases to treat. One dose of PraziPro just takes care of it because it doesn't have an egg stage like flukes do, so you don't have to dose PraziPro or General Cure twice. One treatment of PraziPro takes care of black ick. So over here, some people confuse this with clownfish hypermelanization, and that's why I'm showing you this. So this isn't a disease. If basically a clownfish tries to get together with a host and there's some issues between them, like the host isn't accepting the clownfish, it will actually sting them, and you'll see these small black dots on them, and there's no treatment, it's not a disease, it's just something that usually basically goes away in time once the host accepts the clownfish. But just to kind of show you the difference between clownfish hypermelanization and black ick. You can see the black ick is smaller. Okay, lymphocystis. So this is actually a virus that lives inside the fish. I call it the herpes of the fish world because so many fish seem to have this. Many fish will actually have lympho and you'll never actually see symptoms. They're asymptomatic. If a fish does display symptoms, it will look like white cauliflower on the fish. Sometimes it will start really small like ick, and then it just grows in size to look like this cauliflower-like growth. This is, again, there's no treatment for viruses in fish. What you're trying to do, the strategy is to send the virus back into remission. Beta glucan has actually been scientifically proven, if you food soak beta glucan, to help send viruses back into remission, including lympho. So that's the best treatment for that. Okay, HLLE, a lot of people are familiar with this. Basically, it will look like the skin's fish, the skin is actually peeling off the fish. Tangs seem to be most susceptible. There's 4 theories as to what causes it. Stray voltage, running cheap carbon. I only use rock 0.8 because I don't want to deal with this with cheap carbon dust getting in the water. Nutritional deficiency, you know, people that only feed flakes and pellets, sometimes their fish will get HLE. You should feed high quality frozen food, lots of nori if you have herbivores, and also copper exposure. So sometimes if you have a fish in copper for 30 days or even 2 weeks, you'll see a little bit of HLE. Usually when you move them out of copper, and food soaked vitamins usually clears it up. Okay, so I'll kind of go through this quickly. So internal issues, and there are a lot of different internal issues. Marine biologist once told me everything that you can see that goes wrong on the outside of the fish can also go wrong on the inside. So the two main ones that we see are intestinal worms and internal parasites or internal flagellates. They have the same symptoms. So that's why I recommend food soaking general cure, because you really don't know which one the fish has. The symptoms are white stringy feces, pinched stomach, loss of color, fish will eat voraciously, but still seems to be losing weight. And I try to tell people, just because a fish has white stringy feces, it doesn't necessarily mean that the fish has intestinal worms or parasites. It could just be intestinal irritation. But if you're seeing these symptoms together, the white feces, the pinched stomach, the dull coloration, the fish is losing weight, there's a pretty good chance the fish does have either internal parasites or worms, and you should food soak. General cure is the best one to use. Internal infections, bacteria, kind of rare. You don't see those a whole lot. You'll see sometimes bloating or lumps or swollen areas that look more on the inside. Best thing to do for that is to food soak Metro combined with neomycin sulfate. CChem makes a medication called Neoplex, and they also make Metroplex, which are these two medications. Swim bladder disorder. So fish with a swim bladder disorder so if a fish is swimming vertically with its tail up, that's a swim bladder disorder. If the fish is swimming vertically with the tail down, that's more indicative of a spinal injury. Swim bladder disorders usually come from improper collection techniques. Some of the fish are collected in deep water. Basically, the collectors don't take enough time to bring the fish up, and they develop, as a result, they'll develop a gas bubble in the swim bladder, and that's what causes them to swim vertically with the tail up. Sometimes you'll also even see the gas bubble protruding through the skin, and you can try what's called lancing or venting the swim bladder. There's some tutorials out there. I think there's actually, there might be a sticky on Reef to Reef about how to do that. You basically have to use like a needle to suck the air out. Usually only see that in deep water fish. Wrasses are notorious for spinal injuries. I know there was someone here that was a big wrasse collector. Because they jump so much, or they'll dart into rocks, or like I said, they'll jump. They'll sometimes hit your lid in just the wrong way, damage their spinal column, and cause a spinal injury. And the last one is constipation. Believe it or not, fish get constipated just like the rest of us. I mean, sometimes you'll see a bloated stomach. And that's actually the best you can hope for with internal stuff. I've actually had pretty good luck feeding a peeled boiled green pea, because it's high in fiber, helps to flush it out. You can dose Epsom salt, or you can food soak Epsom salt because it serves as a laxative. You can also dose kanamycin, CChem Canaplex, because diarrhea is a known side effect. So that can help with that. So here's kind of like, here's a clownfish, and this is the classic white stringy poop symptom that you'll see. And this is when you see this, the fish might have intestinal parasites or worms. Again, this is just one symptom. You know, like I said before, you want to see the pinched stomach, and you want to see the fish getting thin to, you know, kind of take a total picture of the situation before you start to treat. Okay, bacterial infections. So what basically happens, you normally won't see a bacterial infection unless a fish is already sick. So when a fish has parasites or worms, their immune system is already basically tied up trying to fight that off. Also, the parasites and the worms feed on the fish. They leave like little tiny holes on the fish. So just kind of like if we get a cut and the cut gets infected, well, the fish can get infections. And the infections have a lot of different symptoms. You can see like this coli tang. It's got like this red discoloration. Red sores can mean urinema. It can mean a bacterial infection. Sometimes you'll see kind of like a white, not like think of like a white patch, but something a lot larger than brook. That can be indicative of a bacterial infection. You can see here this Achilles tang has a cloudy eye. That can be bacterial infection. And this is another classic symptom, so fin rot. So anytime you see rot on the fins and that's usually bacteria feeding on the fish. And for this, you would want to dose an antibiotic. Bacterial infections are the worst thing you can deal with because everything else has a pretty straightforward treatment. Bacterial infections, there's so many different antibiotics, and you're just trying to match up the right antibiotic with the right bacterium you're trying to fight. You can't take a scrape of a bacterial infection and identify the bacteria. You can only stain it and tell if it's gram positive or gram negative. Most saltwater fish have gram negative infections. Okay, so medications. So this is just from my form. These are medications to keep on hand. And at the first column there, you'll see the bare essentials. This is just what I recommend for if anybody wants to quarantine fish. This is what you want to have. So I use Copper Power. You can use Cupramine. Nothing wrong with Cupramine. I've just had better success with Copper Power. But I highly recommend using the Hanna High Range Copper Colorimeter for testing because it's a lot more accurate than trying to read, like those test kits where you're trying to read the color testing and everything. You also can use Metro, which Seachem Metroplex. So basically copper treats the ick and velvet, Metro treats brook and urinema. So when you combine them, that gives you a wide spectrum parasitic treatment. For deworming, we talked about flukes and black ick, Pro or API General Cure. You can use either one. Antibiotics to have on hand. I recommend AAP Spectrogram or nitrofuransin green powder. I really like nitrofuransin green powder because it can actually be used for a lot of different reasons. You can use it to treat bacterial infections. You can also use it if you have a new fish arrives and the water is cloudy, maybe it stinks, maybe there's ammonia in the water. NFG contains methylene blue, which can be used to detoxify a fish that's been exposed to ammonia. So it's actually a really good pre-treatment too to run the fish through before you put them in quarantine. It's a little expensive, but what I would do, since you guys have a club, you can kind of go in on it and maybe then order the minimum amount, which I think is like $100, and you can kind of divvy it up among your club members and everything. Emergency bath treatments, Ruby Reef Rally. It has 2 antiseptics and a little bit of formalin. It covers a wide range of diseases. Will give the fish temporary relief for velvet, brook, and some other diseases. Formalin, formalin is a very powerful chemical. You can use it to treat velvet, brook, urinema. The only caveat with formalin is it is a known carcinogen. So some people don't like having that in their house because it is a cancer-causing agent. So, that's something to decide. Internal issues. So we were talking about this earlier. So, if you have a fish that has the white stringy poop and the other symptoms and you suspect internal parasites or worms, Seachem Focus is used to bind General Cure, API General Cure, to the medication to treat internal parasites and intestinal worms. And then down below, if you go on my form, there's other medications to have. Some like chloroquine phosphate, really difficult to get right now after COVID. They really have almost taken it off the market, but it's a good medication. There's many others. So I just took like a picture of some of the medications that I use. So you can see Copper Power, we talked about that. That's Rally. Fenbendazole is an alternative dewormer that I like to use. You can dose it in the water to treat external worms like flukes or black ick. You can food soak it to treat intestinal worms. National Fish Pharmaceuticals sells it. It's a great medication. It's a lot gentler on the fish than Pro or Pro or General Cure. It's just harder to get. You have to buy it in bulk. Like I have 250 grams here. Furin 2 is a good antibiotic to use. It's nitrofurazone based, and then over on the right there's General Cure. So the thing is, I don't really have a whole lot of just like hobbyist grade medications. I use a lot of stuff from the National Fish Pharmaceuticals. So like you can see over on the left, I have kanamycin sulfate. That's basically the same thing as Seachem Canaplex, nitrofuransin green powder. The one difference I will say between buying medications from a place like National Fish Pharmaceuticals is most of the medications are going to be closer to pharmaceutical grade. So they're going to be 95, 96% pure. So they're going to be more effective. They're going to work faster. CChem will tell you right on their website, most of their medications are only 70% active. So they put fillers or whatever in them. They're just not going to work as well. But obviously buying from NFP is more expensive and you have to buy in larger quantities, which is why, you know, if you could do a group buy. Yeah, they do them by weight, not, and yeah, these also, you need a small digital scale that can measure milligrams, because these are all dosed by weight, not by scoop. So it's a little bit more technical, but they're a lot more effective too. Okay, so we talked about a quarantine tank. Well, I took a couple of pictures. So this is a simple quarantine tank. You can kind of see here, it's just basically, it's got a heater. It's got a sponge filter, air-driven sponge filter in it. This is something you can set up really quickly on the fly. And now you can, that sponge, you can put it down in your DT sump and you can seed it with bacteria. Some people don't do that. If you just go with a sponge here that does not have, you haven't seeded it with nitrifying bacteria, you're gonna have to deal with ammonia. So, but it's a quick, easy QT that you can set up on the fly here, works great. Okay, so this is more what I use. So this is a 40 breeder that I've set up as a quarantine tank. And you can see the heater. You can see over on the left, I've got the ammonia alert badge, which actively monitors ammonia for you. There's over on the right, it's got like a cheap Corellia wave maker that I have for additional flow. I don't know why it's pointed down. I always have it pointed up, raking the surface of the water for additional gas exchange. A lot of people know about using PVC elbows for hiding places. You can see one there. So in the back is the CChem tidal power filter. And inside that chamber, you can put biomedia. You can put thick sponges. You can put CChem matrix. Another one is fluval biomax. And the reason I'm pushing, if you will, biomax and CChem matrix is we've actually tested them, myself and another person on my forum, and they're inert, so they don't absorb copper. So if you use CChem matrix, you use fluval biomax, you'll have really good biomedia which can culture nitrifying bacteria, but you don't have to worry about it absorbing your copper, because that's the issue with rock. Sometimes if you use it, it will absorb copper. It doesn't do that. Okay, and also I just stress, you can kind of see on here, there's a lid that I just kind of made out of an egg crate. It's always a good idea to have a lid on your quarantine tank, because especially with wrasses, fish like to jump out. Okay, so this is just a little plug for my forum, tumble.fish. You can go, if you want to access the website, there's links over on the left to get all the information you need. You can see we have a forum. It's pretty much nonstop, people asking questions. There's people answering questions. So if you ever need some live help, you can post pictures on the forum and everything, and either myself or someone else will help you. We also have vendors on my forum who specialize in selling quarantine fish. So if you don't want to quarantine for yourself, you can buy from one of those vendors. I think we have about 4 or 5 of them now. And what they do is they quarantine, condition the fish, and then they sell them to people. Obviously you pay more, but you know, that's a service they provide. And I think that's it. Sorry, I went a little fast with that probably. Let me
That's
try
okay.
to...
That's okay. I mean, it was good. I know rushing through, but yeah, it's good that you have your forum set up for that kind of thing, and people can find quarantine fish and buy those fish easier, you know, for that kind of purpose. That's good. So,
Okay, we're back. Yep.
There you're back on. So, anybody else have any other questions? Anybody hadn't talked for a chance, or Chris?
I got one more question. I've been talking the whole time,
That's
but
okay.
I have one more question. So I actually I watched your interview on like Reef Dudes or something on YouTube. I think it's 2 years old maybe, and some of the older stuff I was reading from you, it seemed like you were more recommending a 2.0 for therapeutic copper level, but everything on your forum and stuff now I'm seeing 2.5. Is that because you're seeing that the ick is getting more resistant, or am I just quoting you wrong there on that 2.0?
So, okay, so what happened with that is, the the backdrop to this is most wholesalers keep their fish in subtherapeutic copper. So they're getting the fish in, they're keeping them in 1.0, 1.25 copper. What we think is happening is as they do that, we think that the parasites are actually building up a resistance or immunity to the copper. I haven't seen it so much on my forum, but over on Reef to Reef, you'll actually see a lot of posts, threads started about, I ran my fish through 2.0 copper. I, didn't take any shortcuts. And when the fish were in observation, they broke out in velvet. So we think what is happening, we think that velvet in particular is possibly building up resistance to copper. So what I did was I actually spoke with the manufacturer of Copper Power, and I kind of explained the dilemma. I'm saying, look, I know that actually 1.5 is actually considered minimum therapeutic. I'm recommending 2.0, but we're seeing even at 2.0, we're seeing more parasites getting through the copper. What can I do about that? So they actually informed me that they recommend treating at 2.5 ppm. That's actually on their website. And they assured me that the side effects, the fish would not experience any more side effects at 2.5 that they would at 2.0. So when I kind of got all that information and also getting more anecdotal accounts of copper resistant parasites, if you will, I don't like copper. But I'm like, well, if people are going to treat in copper, let's make sure it's doing the correct job. So that's the one I'm now recommending 2.5 ppm. I'm trying to slowly develop quarantine protocols which don't involve the use of copper. That's what the hydrogen peroxide thing is all about, because I am very mindful that copper is a liquid poison. It's bad for the fish. It destroys their gut flora. There's a lot of negative side effects to using copper. But the problem is, at least at the moment, it's the mainstream treatment. It's what everyone knows. It's what's widely available. So I'm trying to educate people on how to use copper in the safest way possible, in the most effective way possible. But at the same time, I'm working to develop new treatments where hopefully in the future, we don't have to use copper anymore.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions? Anybody that's want to unmute and ask a question to Bobby before we go for the day? Talk now. Everybody's quiet.
Everybody's quiet.
Except Matt. Matt likes he's a big question man.
Hey,
Yeah, he's a big question man. He has a lot.
I've been blowing up his Facebook inbox, so he's probably used to it already. So thank you so much. This is awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Did you have a question? Do you have anybody else have a question or anything? Want a question to Bob before we go out here for the night? Because I'll let him get out of here and I'll see if I can upload this on YouTube, and Bobby can use it for his form, or if he wants to show it up on there, and we'll have it so we can show it on our Facebook page so everybody gets to see it. But yeah, it's a big topic, and there's a lot of stuff goes on with fish and diseases. I've always been pretty lucky with them, but it can be a problem. I know. When I first had my tanks, I was having all kinds of problems, but I've had fish for years. Mostly what happens to me is I have them for years. I give them to somebody else because I'm bored with them, and then somebody else kills them.
Yep.
That's what happens to my fish.
I've actually had former clients of mine who they bought all their fish from me. I mean, we fully stocked large tanks, and then they sell the tank to someone else, and then the people start mixing my quarantine fish, I guess, with their fish, and yeah, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that's what I've had all my fish in that tank that I had them on there forever, and I gave them someone else, and they killed them within a week. It's like,
yeah, and it's like because there's one person I have in mind, and I mean, like I can remember all the fish I quarantined for them. I mean, one was a regal angel, and there was some other fish. There was some tangs. There was a nice pair of clownfish. I mean, I actually can picture all these fish. I was quarantining them, and I mean, his tank was doing great. I mean, his tank was just doing amazing. He wasn't having any problems, but he's actually going to be moving soon. He didn't want to move the big tank, so he sold it to someone local, and the person just basically mixed the quarantine fish with some other fish in another tank that had never been quarantined. And I mean, yeah, But
That would
what
be
can you do?
awful. That would be awful with like a regal angel which is a tough fish. That is
Oh
one
yeah, yeah.
tough fish to get broken into an aquarium. I know that. That's
You had a regal angel. There was like a powder blue tang, flame angel. I mean, you get a really nice like collection of fish.
those are tough. Those small angelfish are another fish that are really tough because they could get so many different diseases on those small, like the flame angels and
Mhm.
those fish are just. I stopped even getting them because I had so much trouble with them. I didn't. I did. I learned my lessons on fish that I want to. Well, I wouldn't recommend that fish.
The absolute worst of these little deep water anthias, like the tucas, mispinises, because they have such small mouths, they only really want to eat small food. They need to be fed 5 or 6 times a day because of their metabolisms. I mean, and they don't always eat pellets right away, so it's not like you can just set up an auto feeder on pellets to drop in there for them. And they fight. That's the other thing. That's the other problem with anthias is anthias have a hierarchy where you have the male and you have the dominant female and the other females. And in a DT environment, they have rocks and everything to get away from each other. Well, in a QT environment, you're trying to like place enough PVC elbows to alleviate the aggression, but I mean, you never do. And they actually you ever watch some of the more aggressive anthias, they'll actually go on their side and like bite at them, like the leer tails, the bimax. They'll actually like attack each other and just bite at them. And so I've actually started, sometimes I just kind of quarantine them in different tanks, and then you'll all meet up again once you get into the DT, because it doesn't work quarantining those fish together
Yeah,
sometimes.
they're going to have to be in a pretty big tank, or somebody's going to have to understand their whole structure, and also how to get away. Or in the ocean, they can get away from each other pretty good.
Well, most anthias is interesting. If you go research them, like a male and a harem of females, which can be like 8 or 9 females, they actually occupy about 15 to 20 feet of reef.
Right.
So and that's their territory. And I mean, and it's an enormous territory that they occupy to get away from each other. And I mean, it's basically the male is trying to pester the females because he's trying to prevent them from turning male. And then the dominant female pesters or is aggressive towards the other females because everybody's trying to maintain their pecking order. Nobody wants to, fall down the ladder. So
That's good. Okay, well, I'll let you go, Bobby, and
okay.
great talking to you again. And if you're heading up, if you run around, you're welcome to come up here anytime and see us up here anytime when you come.
Will do. I will
Travel.
do. We'll probably be passing through Louisville at some point.
That's right. So we'll see you
Here.
later. Bye, Matt.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye, Jessica. Bye, Dirks. There's quite a few people on here, so I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.